They blocked the doorway to the common room like sentries. "You're not listed as next of kin," Marcus said coldly, arms crossed over his tailored charcoal suit. His brother Nathan shifted beside him, adjusting his cufflinks, the gold ones I'd given him for his 30th birthday. "This is for direct family only," Nathan added, his voice softer but no less final. I stared at my sons, two men in expensive suits I'd probably paid for, standing in a nursing home I'd spent 14 months visiting daily. And something inside me cracked. Direct family? I changed their diapers when they had the flu. I sat through every parent-teacher conference, every baseball game, every Christmas morning watching them tear through presents I'd saved months to afford. I wrote checks I couldn't afford when they were between opportunities. I bailed them out of debt, bad decisions, and worse relationships. And now I wasn't family enough to attend my own mother's estate reading. The room smelled of lemon polish and old coffee, that distinctive nursing home scent that never quite masks the underlying odour of age and antiseptic. Victorian-style wallpaper, cream with pale blue stripes, probably unchanged since the 1990s. I stood clutching my manila folder against my chest like armour. Inside were documents, originals, not copies. But at that moment, nobody cared. Not the estate lawyer sitting at the mahogany table, not his assistant with her tablet, not even the handful of distant relatives pretending to read their phones while listening to every word. "I received a notice," I said quietly, keeping my voice level. "From Patterson and Associates. It listed this address and time, 10 a.m., November 5th. Marcus scoffed, his jaw clenching the way it used to when he was a teenager caught in a lie. "They made a mistake. We're handling Grandma Helen's estate now. She appointed us last spring when she revised her will. She didn't have children. I'm her daughter." Nathan gave that patronizing half-smile he'd perfected in pharmaceutical sales training. The smile that said, "I'm going to explain something simple to someone who doesn't understand. Mum, look, you're not in the updated documents. I know this is confusing, but we can explain everything later. For now, please don't make this awkward for everyone." Awkward. As if my presence at my own mother's estate reading was the social equivalent of wearing white to someone else's wedding. I studied the carpet, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Burgundy with gold flecks, worn thin in the traffic paths. A stain near the radiator. Tea, probably. Someone's small tragedy absorbed into the fibres and forgotten. I let the silence stretch and grow heavy, let them shift uncomfortably, let the other relatives glance up from their phones. Then I stepped forward. "I'm not here to make anything awkward," I said carefully, meeting Marcus's eyes. "I'm here because Helen wanted me present." "You're not on the list," said the receptionist behind the desk. Her nameplate read K. Morrison in neat gold letters. She looked young, maybe 25, uncomfortable with the confrontation unfolding in front of her. I didn't blame her. She was just doing her job, reading from whatever list my sons had provided. "She would have wanted me here," I said again. Not to them this time, to the room itself, to the walls that had heard Helen's laughter during better days. I reached into my folder with steady hands and pulled out a document. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges, 14 years old but perfectly preserved in my fireproof safe. I handed it to Miss Morrison. "Please give this to Mr. Patterson. I believe it supersedes any amendments filed last spring." Ms. Morrison blinked, took the paper like it might burn her, and disappeared through the heavy oak door. Marcus started to say something, his face flushing red, but Nathan grabbed his arm. "Let's just wait," Nathan muttered, though his eyes were sharp, calculating. "Let's see what she's got." I sat in the leather chair they'd been guarding, the one at the end of the table closest to the lawyer's door. Neither stopped me, though Marcus's hands curled into fists at his sides. The folder rested on my lap, no longer a shield. Now it was proof. Now it was a weapon I'd carried for 14 years without knowing I'd ever need to draw it. The minutes crawled by. Marcus paced near the window, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the hardwood. Nathan sat down, stood up, sat down again. Across the table, a cousin I hadn't seen in 20 years gave me a faint nod. At least someone in this room remembered basic human decency. The door opened. Mr. Patterson stepped in, tall, silver-haired, mid-60s with reading glasses perched on his prominent nose. He'd been Helen's lawyer for over 20 years. He held my document, flipping through it with methodical slowness, his expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, looking directly at me, "may I speak with you privately for a moment?" "We were told this was a closed session," Marcus snapped, stepping away from the window. "Whatever you need to discuss with her can be discussed in front of the family." Mr. Patterson ignored him completely, as if Marcus were a piece of furniture that had spoken out of turn. "This concerns joint filings from 2009. Matters of legal precedence. If you'll follow me, Mrs. Ashford." His office was small but well appointed. It smelled like old leather and mint tea. No guest chairs, only a standing desk covered in files and a tall window overlooking the facility's memorial garden. He laid my document flat on the desk's surface. "This is unexpected," he said slowly, running his finger down the page. "You and Helen executed a mutual will in 2009. Witnessed, notarized, filed with the county recorder. It predates the revision your son submitted by 14 years. My hands trembled slightly. She insisted on it after my husband died, after she saw how the boys behaved. She said she didn't trust anyone but me." He looked up, his grey eyes studying my face. "Mrs. Ashford, I need to be absolutely clear. Legally, this document overrides the later changes unless it was explicitly revoked in your presence, with your consent, and with proper documentation. Was it?" "No." He nodded once, removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Then you are the sole beneficiary. The entire estate, the house on Maple Street, the investment portfolio, the bonds, the savings accounts, the memorial fund she established, everything." The words hung in the air between us. I felt my knees weaken slightly and I gripped the edge of the desk. "The boys don't know?" I asked. "They suspect something, I imagine. But no, they don't know the extent. They submitted a will dated April 2023, signed only by Helen. Their attorney filed it with the probate court last month, but that document is invalid in the presence of this mutual will, which was never legally dissolved." A pause. A long one. "Would you like me to inform them now? Or during the reading?" I thought about Marcus blocking my entrance, about Nathan's condescending smile, about 14 months of daily visits while they never came once, about every check I'd written, every excuse I'd made for them, every time I'd chosen to believe the best when the evidence suggested otherwise. "No," I said. "Let them hear it during the reading, with everyone else." He studied me for a long moment, then carefully placed the document in a leather folder. "You'll stay for the reading?" "Yes," I said, "now that I've been allowed to sit." When I returned to the common room, my sons wouldn't look at me directly, but I saw everything in their peripheral vision, the tension in Nathan's shoulders, the way Marcus's jaw worked back and forth. They knew something had shifted. They didn't know how much, not yet, but they could feel the ground beneath them starting to crack. For once, I wasn't the one waiting for permission to exist in a space that should have welcomed me from the start. 16 years earlier, Mom died on a Tuesday in March. Aneurysm. She was laughing at something on television one moment, gone the next. Dad followed 6 months later, just gave up, the hospice doctor said, though we all knew it was a broken heart. At 22 and 23, Helen and I stood in our childhood kitchen, orphaned and terrified, surrounded by casserole dishes from neighbours who didn't know what else to do. We'd always been close. Irish twins, people called us, born 11 months apart. I was the practical one. Always reading, always planning, always 3 steps ahead. Helen was the dreamer, the one with paint under her fingernails and poetry in her pockets. I balanced checkbooks. She painted watercolours that made people cry. I married young. She travelled the world with a backpack and a sketchbook. But when it mattered, when the world fell apart and the lawyers used words like probate and estate settlement, we chose each other. "Let's make a pact," Helen said one night. We were sitting on the kitchen floor of our parents' house, surrounded by boxes we were supposed to be packing. We'd opened a bottle of cheap wine Mum had been saving for a special occasion that never came. "Whatever happens, marriages, kids, money, all of it, we look out for each other. No one else will." She extended her pinky finger, and I linked mine with hers the way we had as children making promises we thought we'd never break. At the time, I thought it was the wine talking, the grief making us sentimental. I was wrong. Helen meant every word. I met James at a hospital fundraiser 2 years later. He was a respiratory therapist with kind eyes, terrible jokes, and a smile that made me feel like maybe the world wasn't as heavy as I'd been carrying it. We married within a year in a small ceremony at the courthouse. Helen was my maid of honor, wearing a vintage dress she'd found at a thrift store and altered herself, covered in hand-sewn beads that caught the light. I had Marcus at 25, Nathan at 27. 2 boys who filled our small house with noise and chaos, and a love so fierce it sometimes frightened me. Helen never married, never had kids. When I asked her why, she'd shrug and say, "I have enough family to manage already." She became the cool aunt, the one who sent postcards from Thailand and Morocco and Iceland, the one who taught the boys to mix colours and see the world as something beautiful rather than just functional, the one who showed up at Christmas with gifts she'd made herself, hand-bound journals, painted rocks that looked like tiny planets, scarves she'd woven from yarn she'd dyed in her bathtub. The boys adored her when they were young. "Aunt Helen!" they'd scream, running to meet her whenever her battered Subaru pulled into our driveway. She'd scoop them up, both of them somehow, even when they got too big for it, and spin them around until they were dizzy with laughter. But somewhere along the way, things changed. Time has a way of doing that, shifting foundations so gradually you don't notice until the house is already tilting. The shift. James died suddenly when I was 46. Pulmonary embolism. We were eating dinner, spaghetti, I remember, because I can still see the red sauce on his plate. And he was laughing at something Nathan had said. Then he wasn't laughing. Then he was on the floor and I was screaming, and the paramedics were saying words like massive and nothing we could do. He was laughing at dinner, gone before the ambulance arrived, 49 years old. Marcus was 21, finishing his last year of college. Nathan was 19, working part-time at an auto shop. They grieved for exactly 1 week. I counted the days before the questions started. Who gets Dad's truck? What about the life insurance? Who's handling the mortgage? I was still numb, still finding myself setting the table for 4 instead of 3. They were already planning, calculating, dividing what remained into manageable pieces. Marcus graduated and went into commercial real estate. Started making good money within 3 years. 60,000, then 80, then over 6 figures. He bought expensive suits and a condo downtown, and a car that cost more than James and I had spent on our first house. Nathan became a pharmaceutical sales rep. All charm and smooth talking. The kind of person who could convince you to buy something you didn't need. I was proud of them. Of course I was. But success did something to them. Or maybe it just revealed what had always been there. When Marcus's first investment deal collapsed, something about zoning laws and a partnership that fell through, he needed $15,000 to bridge the gap. I wrote the check without hesitation, pulling from the life insurance money I'd been saving. "I'll pay you back in 3 months, Mom, I promise. This next deal is a sure thing." He never did. The next deal became the deal after that, became another opportunity, became a pattern I should have recognized sooner. When Nathan's girlfriend, a woman I'd never trusted, maxed out his credit cards and disappeared with a married man from her yoga class, Nathan was devastated and broke. $12,000 in debt, his credit score destroyed. I paid off the cards, took money from my retirement account, paid the early withdrawal penalty, and made my son whole again. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Mom. You're a lifesaver." No questions asked. just love. Just a mother protecting her children from consequences I told myself they didn't deserve. Helen watched it all happen. She'd come over for Sunday dinners, and she'd sit at the table quiet, observant, seeing things I refused to acknowledge. "They're using you, Diane," she said one afternoon while I was writing another check for Marcus, this time for a business expense he needed to cover before his commission came through. "They're my sons. They're grown men treating you like an ATM with unconditional approval." I didn't want to hear it. So I stopped inviting her to dinners when the boys were there, started seeing her separately, keeping the worlds apart. She never said, "I told you so," but I could see it in her eyes every time I made an excuse for another loan that would never be repaid. Helen's decline. Helen's decline started so subtly I almost missed it. She'd always been a little scattered, the artist's temperament, I told myself. But then, she started repeating stories she'd just told me 10 minutes earlier. Forgetting appointments, showing up a day early or a day late, confused about why I wasn't ready. Then one morning, her neighbour called me in a panic. Helen had left the stove on, all 4 burners, gas flames high, and had gone for a walk. The neighbour smelled it, used her spare key, found the kitchen filling with gas. If she'd been 5 minutes later... The diagnosis came 3 weeks later. Early onset Alzheimer's. She was 61. I held her hand in the neurologist's office while he explained what this meant. The progression, the timeline, the eventual loss of everything that made Helen herself. She sat perfectly still until we got to my car. Then she gripped the dashboard and said, "I'm not going into a home, Dee. I'd rather die. I'd rather walk into the ocean and keep walking." "Then you'll live with me," I said. The decision was instant, unquestioned, as natural as breathing. Marcus objected immediately when I called to tell him his grandmother was ill. "She's not our responsibility," he said. I could hear restaurant noise in the background. He was out to dinner, probably somewhere expensive. "She's my sister. She never even helped with Dad's funeral costs." That was a lie. Helen had paid for the flowers. Hundreds of dollars worth of white roses because she knew they were James's favourite. But Marcus had rewritten history to fit his narrative. Nathan's response was more measured but equally useless. "Whatever you think is best, Mom. Just don't expect us to help. We've got our own lives." I didn't argue. I just moved Helen into my guest room and became her caregiver. For 3 years, I managed. I drove her to appointments with specialists who offered little hope and expensive medications. I managed her pills, a rainbow of bottles arranged by time of day on my kitchen counter. I sat with her when she forgot who I was, when she called me by our mother's name, when she wept because she knew she was forgetting but couldn't stop it. I held her hand when she remembered, and the grief of remembering was worse than the forgetting had been. My sons visited twice in those 3 years. Total. Once for Christmas, they stayed an hour, brought a grocery store poinsettia, left before dinner. Once for Helen's 64th birthday, Marcus checked his phone the entire time. Nathan made an excuse about a client meeting, and they were gone before we'd cut the cake. But they called often enough. Always when they needed something. Money. Advice. A sympathetic ear when their lives became complicated in ways money couldn't fix. I gave them everything I had left to give, splitting myself between Helen's needs and theirs, trying to be enough for everyone while slowly disappearing in the process. One night, after I'd just finished cleaning up one of Helen's episodes, she'd gotten confused, thought our house was our childhood home, had torn apart the guest room looking for our mother. I found her sitting on the edge of her bed, lucid and present in a way she hadn't been for weeks. "I want to make a will," she said, her voice clear and firm, "with you. Together." "Helen, you don't have to worry about that now. People change when there's money on the table, Dee." She gripped my hand, her fingers still strong despite everything else fading. "Let's not give them the chance." We met with a lawyer the next week. Mr. Patterson, recommended by a friend, mutual beneficiaries. If I died first, everything went to Helen. If she died first, Everything came to me. 2 signatures, 2 witnesses. Filed, and I thought, forgotten. I didn't tell the boys. It didn't seem important. Helen's assets were modest. A small house, some investments, her savings. Nothing that would change anyone's life. I was wrong about that too. The nursing home, when Helen's Alzheimer's progressed to the point where I couldn't safely care for her alone, when I woke up one morning to find her trying to climb out her second-story window because she thought she saw our father in the garden, I knew I had to make a change I'd promised I'd never make. I found Meadowbrook after visiting 7 other facilities that felt like warehouses for the dying. Meadowbrook was different, smaller, expensive, but designed to feel like a home. Private rooms with actual furniture, not just hospital beds. A garden where residents could sit and remember or forget in the sunshine. Staff who learned names and preferences. Helen had her own room on the 2nd floor, corner unit with windows facing east and south. I brought her paintings from her apartment, watercolors of beaches and mountains and abstract swirls. I brought her records, jazz and classical and that one folk album she'd played until the vinyl wore thin. I brought her favorite blue cardigan with pearl buttons she'd worn for 20 years. I visited every day, every single day for 14 months. I brought her butterscotch candies, her favorite since childhood. I read to her from books she'd once loved. Mary Oliver poetry, Jane Austen novels, travel memoirs. Sometimes she knew me. Sometimes she called me by our mother's name, or by her childhood friend's name, or by no name at all. It didn't matter. I stayed. I held her hand. I brushed her hair. I sat in the silence when words no longer meant anything and presence was the only language left. My sons never visited. Not once in 14 months. I didn't ask them to. I stopped expecting anything from them somewhere around month 3, when I realized their absence had become a presence of its own, a ghost that sat in Helen's room during my visits, reminding me of who I'd raised and who they'd become. But when Helen died peacefully in her sleep on a Saturday morning in early October, the nurses said she simply stopped breathing sometime between the 3 a.m. check and the 5 a.m. medication round. Both my sons showed up to the funeral. Marcus gave a speech about cherishing family and the importance of legacy that sounded like it had been written by ChatGPT. Nathan stood stiffly next to him, checking his phone, his face arranged in appropriate grief that didn't reach his eyes. 12 people came. Helen had touched hundreds of lives, students she'd taught, fellow artists she'd mentored, neighbors she'd helped. But most were gone now or too old or too far to make the trip. The service lasted 32 minutes. We buried her next to our parents in a plot she'd purchased years ago. And 2 weeks later, exactly 2 weeks, my son started asking about her estate. The phone call. "Mom, we need to talk about Grandma's will." Marcus, "Saturday afternoon. I'd just finished raking leaves in the yard. What about it?" "We've been looking into things. She had property, investments, accounts. Someone needs to handle it properly." "I'm handling it." A pause. I could hear him breathing, measuring his words. "No offense, Mom, but this is complex. Tax implications, asset distribution, capital gains. You should let us help. This is what I do for a living." "I appreciate the offer, but..." "We've already consulted with an attorney," Nathan interjected. I hadn't realized he was on the call. "Just to make sure everything's done right. You know, legally." "How thoughtful," I said, not hiding the edge in my voice. "Don't be like that. We're trying to help." "When did you start wanting to help with Helen?" The question came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't regret it. Silence. Long enough that I thought they might have hung up. Then Marcus, his voice carefully controlled. "That's not fair. We've been busy, you know that. We've got careers, obligations. I had obligations too, I still came. Look, we're not going to argue about this. We just want to make sure her assets are properly distributed according to her wishes." "And you think you know her wishes better than I do?" "We think," Nathan said, his sales voice sliding into place, "that emotions can cloud judgment. We want to make sure you're protected. that everything is done correctly, for your benefit. That's when I knew, not suspected, knew. They'd already made plans, already consulted lawyers, already divided Helen's estate in their minds. "I'll handle it," I said again, and hung up before they could respond. The reading. Mr. Patterson read the will aloud. Every word, every clause, every single detail of the estate that Helen had built quietly over a lifetime of careful choices. The house on Maple Street, appraised value $485,000. The investment portfolio, $342,000. The bonds and savings accounts, another $127,000. The memorial fund she'd established at Meadowbrook, $50,000. Total estate value, just over $1 million. I felt the air leave the room, felt every head turn, felt my son's shock radiating across the table like heat from a fire. "What the fuck?" Marcus whispered, not quite under his breath. Mr. Patterson continued reading, impassive and professional. In accordance with the mutual will executed on June 14, 2009, and never formally revoked, I hereby designate my sister, Diane Marie Ashford, as sole beneficiary of my entire estate. Marcus shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is insane. That will is from 2009. Grandma revised it last year. We have documents. We have signatures." Mr. Patterson removed his glasses, set them carefully on the table. "You have a draft, Mr. Ashford, which Mrs. Helen Ashford discussed with an attorney last April, but never formally signed." "That's impossible. We were told. You were told what you wanted to hear by an attorney who should have done more thorough research before accepting your retainer." Patterson's voice was calm but firm. "The mutual will executed in 2009 was filed with the county, witnessed by two individuals with no financial interest in the estate, and never legally revoked. It supersedes any subsequent drafts or discussions." "She had dementia." Marcus's face was red now, veins visible in his neck. "She couldn't have made sound decisions." "She had full mental capacity in 2009, 14 years before her diagnosis. The mutual will was executed and filed long before any cognitive decline began. I have medical records if you'd like to contest that fact." Nathan tried a different approach, standing slowly, his hands open in a gesture of reasonableness. "Mr. Patterson, I'm sure there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Our grandmother wouldn't have wanted..." "Your grandmother wanted exactly what she specified in her legally binding will." Patterson's gaze moved from Nathan to me. "Mrs. Ashford, do you accept the terms of this inheritance?" "I do," I said quietly. Marcus turned to me, his expression somewhere between betrayal and rage. "You manipulated her? You isolated her? Took care of her just to get her money?" "I loved her," I said, meeting his eyes without flinching. "There's a difference." "This isn't over," Marcus said. "We're going to fight this. We'll contest it." "You're welcome to try," Mr. Patterson interrupted. "But I should warn you that contesting a will of this clarity and age is expensive, time-consuming, and unlikely to succeed. You'd be spending thousands of dollars for a case you'll almost certainly lose." The reading continued for another 20 minutes. Details about property titles, account transfers, tax implications. I heard maybe half of it. Two focused on the way Nathan's jaw clenched, the way Marcus's hands curled into fists. When it ended, when Mr. Patterson closed his leather folder and declared the proceedings complete, Marcus and Nathan left, without speaking to me. Just gathered their things and walked out. Marcus's footsteps heavy enough to echo. I sat in that common room for a long time after everyone else had gone. Sat in the chair Helen had probably sat in during her lucid days, looking out at the garden she'd helped fund, thinking about the sister who'd protected me even in death. The aftermath. They tried to contest it, of course, hired an expensive lawyer from downtown, Morrison and Hayes, specialists in estate litigation, and filed motions with the probate court. made accusations of undue influence, cognitive impairment, financial manipulation. Mr. Patterson had warned me this would happen. They'll claim you isolated her, pressured her, took advantage of her illness. They'll try to paint you as a predator and themselves as protective grandchildren. Standard playbook for disappointed heirs. Will it work? He'd smiled, a small, tight expression. Not a chance, but it will be unpleasant. He was right. It was unpleasant. For 6 months, I received legal documents, depositions, interrogatories, requests for financial records dating back 15 years, questions about every dollar I'd spent, every decision I'd made, every moment I'd spent caring for Helen. They demanded my phone records to prove I hadn't unduly influenced her, never mind that the will was executed when Helen was perfectly healthy and I was still married to James. They requested medical records to demonstrate her cognitive decline, which only proved she'd been sound of mind for 14 years between the will's creation and her diagnosis. They even hired a handwriting analyst to examine the signature. Through it all, Mr. Patterson remained unflappable. He responded to every motion, provided every requested document, attended every hearing with the calm certainty of a man standing on solid ground. The final hearing was in May. Spring sunshine streaming through the courthouse windows, birds singing outside like they didn't know we were inside destroying what was left of a family. The judge, Patricia Hendricks, mid-50s with steel grey hair and no patience for nonsense, reviewed the case file for exactly 12 minutes before ruling. The will is valid. The contest is denied. Mr. Marcus Ashford and Mr. Nathan Ashford will split the court costs. We're adjourned. 12 minutes, 6 months of harassment, thousands in legal fees, countless sleepless nights, all dismissed in 12 minutes. Marcus slammed out of the courtroom without looking at me. Nathan lingered, opened his mouth as if to say something, then thought better of it, and followed his brother. Outside, Mr. Patterson shook my hand. It's over, Diane. Truly over this time. The decision, the full scope of Helen's estate took months to understand. She'd been more financially savvy than I'd ever imagined. The house was paid off, fully renovated, with a new roof and updated electrical, all done in the 3 years before her diagnosis, as if she'd known time was running out. The investments were conservative but smart. Index funds, municipal bonds, a diverse portfolio that had grown steadily over decades. She'd been contributing systematically since her 20s, living modestly while building wealth quietly. The Meadowbrook Memorial Fund was her final gift to the place that had cared for her. The director cried when she learned about it. And there were smaller things too. A savings account labelled for Diane's retirement. Another marked emergency fund, medical. She'd been taking care of me even as I'd been taking care of her. I could have given my sons something. Some parents would have. Despite everything, they were still my children. But Helen had made her choice, and I decided to honour it. Instead, I set up a trust for Emma, Nathan's daughter, my only granddaughter. She was 16, smart, kind in ways her father had forgotten how to be. She'd visited Helen at Meadowbrook 3 times, more than her father and uncle combined. Brought her homework and sat reading aloud from her English assignments, even when Helen couldn't understand the words anymore. She got $100,000, held in trust until she turned 25, enough to pay for college, start a business, build a life without the burden of debt. The rest, the bulk of the estate, I divided among causes Helen had cared about. The Alzheimer's Foundation, the local art museum's education program, Meadowbrook's Staff Appreciation Fund, the public library where Helen had worked in her 20s, places and organisations that gave more than they took. Marcus sent one last text 3 weeks after probate closed. "You're a vindictive old woman. I hope you're happy alone." I blocked his number. And yes, I was happy. Not because I was vindictive, but because I was finally free. The visit. Nathan showed up at my door 6 months later on a Sunday afternoon in November. The anniversary of Helen's death was approaching. I'd been planning my visit to the cemetery. No suit this time, just jeans and the oil-stained Carhartt jacket from his old mechanic days, before he decided manual labor was beneath him. He looked older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, my hand on the doorframe. Part of me wanted to slam the door. The larger part was just tired of being angry. I stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd signed homework folders and served breakfast and tried to hold a family together through grief and distance. I made tea out of habit, the muscle memory of hospitality stronger than resentment. "I've been thinking," he said finally, wrapping his hands around the mug, "about Grandma, about how I never visited her." I said nothing. Let the silence do the work. "I was ashamed," he continued, not meeting my eyes. "That's the truth. I knew I should have been there, and I just wasn't. And the longer I stayed away, the harder it got to show up, until it felt impossible." "But easy to show up for the will reading." He flinched. Yeah. More silence. Steam rose from our mugs, curling in the afternoon light. "Marcus is still angry. Probably always will be. He's threatened to sue me now, actually. Says I should have backed him up in the contest, that we could have split the estate if I'd supported his case. And I told him to fuck off." Nathan looked up then, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't seen in years. Clarity. "I'm tired, Mom. Tired of being angry. Tired of being the person who only shows up when there's something to take." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. Inside was a check for $3,000, made out to me. "What's this?" "Remember when Dad died and you paid off my credit cards? $2,847. I looked it up in my old statements. Added interest." I stared at the check. My hands were shaking, though I wasn't sure if it was from anger or surprise or something else entirely. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Nathan said quickly. "I'm just trying to be less of a disappointment. Trying to be someone Grandma might have been proud of if she'd lived long enough to see it." The choice. I didn't cash Nathan's check, not because I didn't need the money, though I didn't, not anymore, but because cashing it felt like accepting an apology I wasn't sure I believed yet. Instead, I framed it, hung it in my kitchen right next to the window where morning light hits it just right. Not as decoration, but as proof. Proof that sometimes people surprise you, that sometimes too late is better than never. Nathan started visiting. Not often, once a month maybe, sometimes less. But when he came without agenda. He fixed the leaky faucet I'd been ignoring, helped me clean out the gutters, sat with me and looked through photo albums of Helen, really looked, asking questions about her life I'd never thought he cared to know. He brought Emma with him sometimes. She'd gotten into University of Washington on full scholarship, studying art history and museum curation. Helen would have loved that. I told Emma about the trust on her 18th birthday, took her to Mr. Patterson's office and explained everything. She cried. Not from happiness or gratitude, but from the weight of being seen, being chosen, being trusted with someone's legacy. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "You showed up," I told her. "You stayed. In a world that teaches people to take, you gave. That's everything." Marcus never contacted me again. I heard through mutual friends that he'd had a daughter. My second granddaughter, a child I'd never met. I sent a card when she was born, a simple congratulations with a small check inside. It was returned unopened, marked, "Return to sender." That hurt less than I expected. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd finally learned the difference between loving someone and letting them hurt you. You can do one without the other. The letter. I'm 71 now. Helen has been gone for 3 years. James for 19. My own will is prepared, filed with Mr. Patterson and airtight. I've learned from watching other people's mistakes. Every clause is clear, every intention spelled out, every possible contest anticipated and blocked. Emma gets the bulk of it, not because she's perfect, but because she's present. The house, the remainder of Helen's estate, my own savings. enough to give her options. Nathan gets $25,000. Not enough to change his life, but enough to acknowledge that he tried to change himself. That matters more than people think. And Marcus gets exactly $1, delivered with a letter I've already written and sealed. Marcus, you taught me that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. That family is a choice, not an obligation. That sometimes the cruelest thing you can do is let someone show you exactly who they are and then believe them. Thank you for that lesson. It freed me in ways you'll never understand. Mother. I visit Helen's grave every Sunday, weather permitting. Bring fresh flowers, sunflowers in summer, chrysanthemums in fall, whatever's blooming and bright. I sit on the bench someone donated in her name and tell her about my week, about Emma's latest project at school, about Nathan's slow, halting journey toward being someone better, about the garden I'm planting in the backyard, filled with the same flowers she used to paint. I tell her she was right. People do change when there's money on the table. But she was also wrong about something. Some people change back, not to who they were, but toward who they could have been all along if they'd just chosen differently. For those who need it. There's a kind of grief that comes after clarity, not the grief of loss, but of letting go of what never really belonged to you in the first place. Expectations, illusions, the roles you played so long you forgot they were optional. I wasn't just their mother. I was a sister, a caregiver, a woman who'd loved a good man and buried him too soon. I was someone who kept promises, even when no one remembered I'd made them. And I was someone who'd finally learned to say no and enough and not anymore. Helen taught me that. In life, through her choices, in death, through her legacy. The house is quieter now than it's ever been. But it's not the uncomfortable quiet of loneliness. It's the peaceful quiet of a space that's finally fully mine. No one else's expectations filling the rooms, no one else's needs echoing off the walls. I've started painting. Nothing good. Helen was the artist, not me. But it doesn't matter. I paint abstracts in colours I like, shapes that don't mean anything except what they mean to me. I've hung them on my walls and they make me smile. I've joined a book club at the library, travel to wine country twice a year with a group of women, volunteer at Meadowbrook, reading to residents who are where Helen once was, offering presents when words no longer work. I've built a life that's mine, smaller than the one I had when James was alive and the boys were young, but fuller somehow, richer in the ways that matter. If you've read this far, maybe you understand something I didn't for too long. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're dignity. Protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Maybe you've been the giver too long, the forgiver, the one who stepped back so others could step forward. Maybe you've written checks you couldn't afford to people who never said thank you. Maybe you've shown up again and again for people who only remembered you existed when they needed something. If you have, I hope you know. You can stop. You can say no. You can say enough. You can protect the parts of yourself you used to hand out freely. And you don't have to apologize for starting late. You only have to start. Helen left me more than money. She left me permission. Permission to choose myself, to stand firm, to let people face the consequences of their choices without cushioning the fall. That's the real inheritance. Not the house or the investments or the financial security, though those matter. The real gift was the example she set of a woman who lived on her own terms and died with her dignity intact. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to demand respect. You're allowed to walk away from people who only love what you can give them. You're allowed to be whole, and you're not alone. Not anymore. If you've ever given until you had nothing left, if you've made yourself small so others could feel big, share this with someone who needs to remember they're allowed to say, enough. Tell me your story. Tell me about the moment you finally chose yourself. We're here. We're listening. And we understand.